When God brings someone into your life, it's rarely at the moment you expect. It's not when everything is stable, nor when you feel entirely ready to receive them. Instead, it happens when something within you begins to shift. When your soul starts to hunger for something deeper than the ordinary, divine timing has a strange way of revealing divine purpose. It disrupts comfort to initiate transformation. And that's what most people don't understand. God's timing isn't designed for your convenience. It's designed for your growth. When you meet a person who feels like a gift from God, the connection often doesn't make sense logically. You can't trace it through mere attraction, compatibility charts, or shared interest. It feels different. Like your heart recognizes something your mind hasn't yet understood. That recognition is spiritual in nature. It's not about chemistry. It's about calling. It's about two paths that were being shaped long before they ever crossed, converging at a moment neither person could have orchestrated. But here's where the challenge begins. Because when something is truly divine, it's not always easy. God's gifts don't come wrapped in perfection. They come with purpose. They demand responsibility, patience, and discernment. And divine timing requires endurance. Because you often have to hold on through uncertainty. The person God sends may appear in your life at a time when you're still healing, still figuring out who you are, or still wrestling with doubt. You might even question why now. Why would God bring them before I'm fully ready? The answer lies in the process itself. God doesn't just give what you want. He gives you what will grow you. A divine connection isn't meant to satisfy your desire for immediate happiness. It's meant to awaken your deeper potential. When two people are divinely aligned, their meeting sets in motion a process of refinement. Each person becomes a catalyst for the other's evolution. The timing forces you to confront your fears, your fear of vulnerability, your fear of losing control, your fear of love that doesn't fit your expectations. In psychological terms, this moment represents what Jung might call a numinous encounter, a sacred confrontation with meaning that reorients the direction of your life. You're not just meeting another person. You're encountering a mirror of your destiny. And that's why divine relationships can feel both exhilarating and terrifying. They reveal not just who you love, but who you must become in order to sustain that love. Sometimes that means separation. Sometimes divine timing involves pauses, periods of waiting, confusion, or silence. Those moments aren't punishments, they're preparation. They're God's way of ensuring you don't mishandle what you prayed for. Many people lose their blessing because they try to rush divine timing. They want the promise without the process. But if you force what God is still forming, you end up breaking what was meant to bless you. You see, the beauty of divine timing is that it's not just about when you meet. It's about who you are when you meet. God won't allow the gift to manifest fully until you've become the kind of person who can receive it without destroying it. That's why He waits until you've been humbled by your failures, softened by your wounds, and strengthened by your solitude. Because only then can you love without possession, commit without control, and cherish without fear. When you understand that, you stop chasing timing and start trusting purpose. You stop asking when will it happen and start asking who am I becoming in the meantime. You begin to see that divine timing isn't delay, it's alignment. And that realization changes everything. So when God asks you to hold on, it's not because He's teasing you. It's because He's teaching you. He's aligning your heart, your habits, and your spirit with the magnitude of the blessing He's preparing to release. That person isn't just a partner. They're a reflection of divine intention. Hold on. Not out of desperation, but out of discernment. Because when God gives, He gives with purpose. And when His timing unfolds, it will not just bring love. It will bring transformation. When you learn to trust God's timing, you stop doubting the gift and start becoming worthy of it. When God gives you someone as a gift, He doesn't simply hand you a finished product wrapped neatly in emotional stability and spiritual perfection. He gives you a soul that carries both potential and imperfection. That's the paradox of divine gifts. They come as seeds, not as fruit. The relationship that is meant for you won't always arrive in its ideal form, because part of your purpose in receiving that person is to help shape what it can become. And that process of growing with someone who's been divinely assigned to your path is where faith is tested most deeply. Most people expect divine love to feel effortless. They imagine that if God truly sent this person, everything should align smoothly like pieces of a divine puzzle falling into place. But the truth is far more complex. Anything that holds eternal value must go through the fire of refinement. You don't become strong by avoiding difficulty. You become strong by enduring it. And the same principle applies to love. God's gifts aren't meant to make you comfortable. They're meant to make you conscious. They push you out of spiritual complacency and force you to grow in patience, humility, and truth. There's a psychological reality embedded here. When you encounter a person who feels destined, they often awaken both your highest virtues and your deepest wounds. They draw out your capacity for compassion, loyalty, and understanding, but they also expose your insecurities, pride, and fear of rejection. That's not dysfunction. That's revelation. The relationship becomes a mirror reflecting back the parts of you that still need healing. And it's precisely in that mirror that growth becomes possible. You see, God doesn't send perfect people. He sends purposeful ones. He sends someone whose very presence triggers your evolution. Think of it like two pieces of rough stone being rubbed together. The friction feels uncomfortable, but it's the only way to bring out the shine. That person might challenge you, frustrate you, or even make you question your own readiness for love. But that tension is holy. It's what God uses to strip away what's superficial so that something sacred can emerge. Philosophically, this ties back to the ancient understanding that love is not merely a feeling, but a discipline, a moral and spiritual training ground. To love someone who's been sent by God is to engage in the work of transformation. You must confront your own ego, your desire to control outcomes, and your tendency to idealize people rather than truly know them. That process is not romantic in the conventional sense. It's sanctifying. It molds your character to be more like the Creator who gave you the gift in the first place. But here's where many people falter. They misinterpret divine friction as incompatibility. They think that because it's hard, it must not be from God. Yet sometimes the most difficult relationships are the ones that shape you into who you're meant to become. The very challenges that make you want to run might be the ones designed to teach you how to stay. God doesn't want you to idolize ease. He wants you to learn endurance. There's a kind of sacred tension in all this. God will give you glimpses of what the relationship could be. Moments of profound connection, understanding, and peace. But He'll also allow distance, silence, and testing. Why? Because He's training you to love with wisdom, not just emotion. He's showing you that the gift is not simply the other person. It's who you become as you learn to love them rightly. So when God asks you to hold on to someone He's called your gift, it's not about clinging out of fear. It's about choosing faith over convenience. It's about recognizing that divine gifts often come wrapped in lessons that stretch your soul. You hold on not because it's easy, but because it's sacred. The person God gives you isn't sent to complete you. They're sent to refine you. And when you embrace that truth, you stop asking, why is this so hard? And start realizing this is how we both become who we were meant to be. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have about divine relationships is assuming that God's confirmation of someone means instant harmony or unbroken unity. But that's not how divine timing works. The person who is your gift may still be in a season of preparation. They might be wrestling with their own fears, wounds, or identity. And that's crucial to understand, because if you don't recognize the role of timing, you'll misinterpret waiting as rejection. And that misinterpretation can destroy something sacred before it fully blooms. God's timing is not aligned with our impatience. When something is meant to be, it's not just the connection that matters. It's the condition of both people involved. Two hearts can be meant for each other. But if one or both are still governed by fear, pride, or insecurity, that connection will collapse under the weight of unhealed emotion. And so, God often separates what he intends to unite, not to punish, but to prepare. He delays the coming together until both individuals are mature enough to handle the weight of divine love. This is where psychological depth becomes essential. A relationship rooted in divine purpose isn't just about attraction. It's about transformation. And transformation demands readiness. If one person hasn't confronted their shadow, those hidden parts of themselves that control behavior, sabotage intimacy, or fear vulnerability, then the relationship becomes lopsided. You'll find yourself trying to pull someone into a level of connection they're not yet capable of sustaining. And that's not love. That's spiritual overreach. Sometimes God's greatest act of protection is not giving you what you're praying for right away, because premature blessings can feel like burdens. You may love someone deeply, but if that love manifests before both people are emotionally and spiritually equipped, it will become chaotic. And God is not the author of confusion. He's the architect of divine order. So when you sense that someone is meant for you yet there's distance, resistance, or delay, you need to stop interpreting that as absence. That gap might actually be sacred space where God is doing invisible work. He's healing trauma, strengthening resolve, humbling egos, refining desires. And that process, while uncomfortable, is necessary, because divine unions require two people who have been made whole individually before they can be strong together collectively. Think about it philosophically. Love that's built too quickly often collapses under the illusion of completion. We project our unmet needs onto the other person, believing their presence will fix our emptiness. But that's not love. That's dependency disguised as devotion. True divine partnership doesn't arise from desperation. It arises from mutual wholeness. That's why God withholds the union until both people can meet each other, not as halves trying to complete something, but as wholes ready to build something eternal. This period of divine waiting also tests your faith. It forces you to ask, do I trust God's process, or am I just addicted to immediate validation? Because if your love is only strong when things are easy, it's not yet grounded in truth. Patience in this context becomes a spiritual discipline. It teaches you to surrender control, to accept that love unfolds according to God's wisdom, not your emotional urgency. In the stillness of waiting, God is shaping you into the kind of person who can sustain the gift he's promised. He's teaching you to replace anxiety with trust, reaction with reflection, and fear with faith. And often, when you reach the point of peace, when you stop striving, stop forcing, and simply rest in alignment, that's when the door begins to open again. Because God doesn't move when you panic. He moves when you're prepared. So if you're waiting on someone God confirmed to your heart, understand this. Delay doesn't mean denial. It's preparation disguised as distance. You're not being forgotten. You're being formed. When the time is right, everything that seemed lost will make perfect sense. The waiting season isn't punishment. It's preparation. And when God finally brings that person back, you'll realize that every moment of silence was him shaping both of you into the people capable of carrying the love he intended all along. Sometimes the greatest challenge in holding on to someone God has chosen for you isn't external. It's internal. It's the war between faith and fear, between what your heart knows and what your mind doubts. You see, we live in a culture that worships certainty. We want proof, clarity, and immediate resolution. But divine love rarely operates in those terms. It demands faith, patience, and courage. And that tension can be unbearable at times because it forces you to trust what you can't yet see. A process that feels irrational to the modern skeptical mind. When God confirms someone as your gift, He doesn't just hand them to you effortlessly. He calls you into a spiritual and psychological process of growth. You're being refined just as much as the other person. And that refinement often happens through uncertainty. The distance, the silence, the waiting. These aren't signs that something is wrong. They read conditions that test whether you're rooted in conviction or merely inconvenience. Fear always tries to convince you to let go prematurely. It whispers, what if you're wrong? What if this isn't from God? What if you're waiting for nothing? And in that moment, your character is revealed, not in the ease of faith, but in the struggle to hold it when nothing seems to make sense. Philosophically, this is the essence of faith. It's a disciplined commitment to meaning despite the absence of immediate evidence. It's the refusal to let uncertainty dictate your destiny. Psychologically, this is where emotional maturity is forged, because to hold on without forcing outcomes requires restraint. It demands that you master your impulses, to not text, not chase, not manipulate situations to prove your worth or accelerate the process. And that's profoundly difficult because human beings are wired to seek control, especially when our hearts are involved. But God's plan doesn't bend to our impatience. If it's divine, it will manifest in divine timing, not through human interference. And maybe that's the deeper lesson hidden in this experience. The difference between attachment and alignment. Attachment is driven by fear, by the belief that if you don't act now, you'll lose what you love. Alignment, on the other hand, flows from faith. It says, if this person truly belongs to me, nothing and no one can disrupt what God has ordained. That mindset transforms the way you handle separation. You stop chasing and start trusting. You stop begging for signs and start embodying peace. You begin to understand that love grounded in divine order doesn't need constant validation. It simply is. Now, that doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean you sit back and do nothing. It means you do the inner work. Heal, grow, align your heart with truth. Because holding on to someone God has confirmed isn't about clinging to their physical presence. It's about preserving the spiritual connection while becoming the version of yourself that can sustain it. You're not waiting for them to change. You're being changed in preparation for them. And here's something most people miss. Faith-based endurance doesn't just shape the outcome. It reveals the worthiness of the gift. If love comes too easily, we often take it for granted. But when it's tested, when it survives distance, doubt, and delay, it gains depth. It becomes sacred. You stop viewing that person as an option and start recognizing them as a divine assignment. So when you feel wary, remember this. God doesn't confirm what He doesn't intend to complete if He's still reminding you of that person. It's not obsession. It's revelation. It's His way of saying, stay the course. I'm not finished writing the story. And that requires a kind of strength most people never develop. The strength to believe before it's visible, to love before it's reciprocated, and to remain still when everything in you wants to run. Faith that survives silence becomes unshakable. So hold your ground, not out of desperation, but out of conviction. Because if this person truly is your gift from God, your endurance isn't in vain. It's proof that your love has matured enough to carry the weight of destiny. One of the hardest things about holding on to someone God has chosen for you is learning how to hold them properly. There's a difference between holding on in fear and holding on in faith. Fear grips tightly because it's terrified of loss. Faith, however, holds with open hands. It trusts that what belongs to it will remain. Many people confuse attachment for love, but genuine divine connection isn't suffocating. It's liberating. When God gives you someone as a gift, He's not asking you to possess them. He's asking you to steward that relationship with maturity, humility, and trust. To steward something means to recognize its value without trying to control its course. In psychological terms, this is what separates healthy love from codependency. The unhealthy mind seeks constant reassurance. It wants to be in charge of outcomes. It demands security at all costs. But a mind anchored in faith understands that control is the enemy of divine order. You can't receive what God has ordained if you insist on managing it by human standards. The moment you try to dominate love, you deform it. And this is where most people struggle. They think that to hold on to someone means to prove, to persuade, or to chase. But that isn't divine alignment. It's emotional desperation dressed in spiritual language. When God calls you to hold on, He's not calling you to obsession. He's calling you to consistency. He's saying, stay grounded, keep your heart pure, keep your posture right. Don't abandon your assignment because of the waiting. And that's a profound distinction, because holding on in faith is about remaining steady internally, even when the external circumstances are uncertain. There's a psychological resilience that comes from this kind of discipline. When you learn to remain faithful without forcing outcomes, you develop an inner structure, an emotional backbone. You become someone who can handle divine timing without collapsing under pressure. And that paradoxically is when God begins to move, because He's not just working on uniting you with that person. He's working on shaping you into the kind of person who can sustain that union. Philosophically, this echoes the ancient principle of logos, order within chaos. To love someone deeply while allowing them the freedom to grow, to struggle, to leave and return, if necessary, is to bring order into emotional chaos. It's the embodiment of wisdom, restraint guided by truth. You start to realize that love isn't about possession. It's about participation in something larger than yourself. When two people are divinely connected, their relationship becomes a vessel for transformation for both of them. And that kind of love cannot be rushed. It unfolds as each individual evolves. There's also a spiritual irony in this. When you stop clinging, you actually make space for reconciliation. Many people lose their divine connections not because love was absent, but because fear suffocated it. They tried to control outcomes, to demand timing, to make things happen on their terms. And that's not how divine orchestration works. What God is trying to teach you is that love sustained by grace doesn't need to be forced. It needs to be trusted. So when He says, hold on, He's really saying, don't let your faith collapse under the weight of uncertainty. It's about the posture of your heart, not the tightness of your grip. Hold with openness, hold with peace, hold with confidence that if this person truly is your gift, nothing, no distance, no misunderstanding, no delay can take them from you. But you have to be willing to trust the process, even when it feels unbearable, because the divine pattern is always cyclical. What leaves in faith returns in completion. If this person was sent by God, then both of you are being prepared for a love that it's not fragile, but fortified. A love that's endured fire and didn't burn away. So hold on, not as someone desperate to keep what's slipping away, but as someone faithful enough to believe that God doesn't give gifts to tease your heart. He gives them to train your spirit. And when your heart learns to hold in faith rather than fear, you don't just keep the gift. You become worthy of it. At some point in this process of divine waiting and emotional refinement, you'll come to realize that what God gives, He also tests. Not to torment you, but to prepare you to see if you truly understand the weight of what you're asking for. When you pray for love, for restoration, for the person you believe is your divine gift, you're not just praying for union. You're praying for transformation. Because the kind of love that comes from God doesn't leave you as you are. It demands your evolution. And this is what most people miss. They want the gift without the growth. They want the promise without the process. But if that person is truly your divine counterpart, then the relationship itself is meant to refine you. It's designed to expose your insecurities, your impatience, your pride, your fears, every part of you that cannot coexist with unconditional love. God doesn't give you someone to make you comfortable. He gives you someone who will help you confront yourself. And that confrontation is holy. It's sacred because it strips away illusion and forces you to see who you really are beneath all your defenses. In psychological terms, this is the individuation process where two people, through the tension of relationship, push each other toward wholeness. It's not easy. It's not tidy, and it's not always romantic in the conventional sense, but it's real. You learn to differentiate between love and attachment, between needing someone and choosing someone. The emotional storms that arise in these connections aren't signs of dysfunction. They're catalysts for growth, because God isn't interested in giving you a relationship that feels good for a moment. He's interested in building a bond that can endure eternity. So when he says, hold on, he's not just telling you to wait for them to come back or to hold faith in their return. He's telling you to stay anchored during the process of refinement, because refinement often looks like separation. It looks like silence, distance, uncertainty. And in those moments, your faith isn't being punished. It's being purified. Can you still trust the promise when the evidence disappears? Can you still believe in the connection when the circumstances contradict it? That's the test. Philosophically, this mirrors the principle of dialectic tension, the idea that truth emerges from the struggle between opposites. The bond between you and that person may go through seasons of harmony and discord, union and withdrawal, faith and doubt. But that tension is necessary because it reveals depth. You can't build divine love on the surface. It must be tested in the depths. And what survives those depths is what's real. The truth is, love that is untested cannot be trusted. If it collapses under pressure, it wasn't built on divine foundation. It was built on emotion. But when love endures misunderstanding, silence, and distance, and still remains rooted in purpose, that's not human sentiment anymore. That's covenant. That's the kind of love that reflects God's own nature. Patient, steadfast, unbreakable. So if you're in that place right now where everything feels uncertain, where you're questioning whether you heard God right, whether you imagined it all, whether it's time to let go, pause, and remember this. The waiting is part of the making. God is not delaying to deny you. He's delaying to develop you, because the version of you that will receive that gift must be strong enough, healed enough, and wise enough to handle it. And that means you can't rush divine timing. You can't manipulate outcomes. You can't shortcut growth. You have to trust that the same God who spoke the promise will also fulfill it in his way and in his time. The challenge is not to make things happen. It's to stay faithful while they're happening beyond your sight. So hold on, not out of fear of losing them, but out of reverence for what God is shaping in both of you. Because divine love isn't proven in the moments of closeness. It's proven in the distance that doesn't destroy it. And when you emerge from that fire, still believing, still becoming, still holding on in faith, you'll realize that the gift was never just the person. The gift was who you became through loving